Okay, so we're going to be in a side lying position. So I want you to sort out for yourself a way that you could be here for most of the class comfortably. So if that means you're going to add a couple layers of blanket, then you might take that into account. But we're going to come into a position where we are on the right side. And what I like to do to keep myself mapped out and organized is to bring myself towards that back edge of the mat so I have something to kind of assess position with. We're going to start here by taking the hand to the back of the skull, and then I'm going to endeavor to swing this elbow back. So it could be sort of like the idea here that my right elbow, my right rib cage, the right side of my pelvis, right leg, that's more or less all tracking along the edge of the mat. And then as you commit to this for the moment, we'll press into those left fingertips and just get a sense here that you have the choice not to just kind of like drop and slouch into the neck, into the shoulder, but there's a way here to kind of pump up a little bit. And could you actually press down enough to lift your right ribs off the floor for a moment? And then we don't have to keep that sustained, but you want to be able to see that that's available movement to you. So we'll try it a couple of times coming up and then coming down. And you can even try that with your hand on your hip. Ooh, becomes a balance pose. So right rib cage coming off the floor and then coming back down. One more time if you can. Left hand somewhere other than the floor if it's possible. Just give it a check in. Oh, lifting the right rib cage off the ground. So you can see here a little bit of space between ribs and floor. And then we'll come all the way on down. All right. And as we're here for the first moment, if this gets fatiguing on your wrist, you could always take the arm out from that head holding position and just let it come along the floor. Otherwise, I'll guide us to continue with that unless you need to adapt otherwise. And with that left hand on the floor for the moment, I'm just going to make sure my legs aren't sweeping forward like they were. We're going to work on that top left leg, reaching out a little bit past the bottom right leg. And then once you have that, I'm going to move my hand out of the way. You're just going to let that release. So you're really coming up here with a movement around the waist and the ribs. You might like your hand right in front. So I'm reaching that left leg out. I'm just taking it off the right leg by a couple of inches, and I'm trying to push it past my right foot and then letting that just kind of all come in and come down. So reaching, I like to lead with my heel bone. So it's not like a ankle mobility exercise per se, but I'm really trying to kick out with that right heel and then letting it come back down. One more of those, reaching, lengthening out. Let's sustain this last one where we push through the heel bone. Leg is just a couple inches off, and you might even feel that you've actually gotten lighter on your rib cage. And could you here amplify that? So left leg lifting a little bit, heel bone kicking out, and then perhaps pressing into that left hand and taking the right ribs off the floor. All right, and then you can let your ribs come down, let your top leg come down. And then from here, I'm just gonna clear my space a little bit. We're going to take that top left leg once more, have it float just above the right one. And as you have that lifting, you're going to move it back. So there's that wall with the single window behind me. And in the first couple, just really think about moving that leg back as far as you can without falling over to chase the foot, and then bring it back in. And we'll do that a few times. So this top leg traveling back, keep some height so it's not just kind of dragging on the top, on the bottom leg or dragging on the floor, and then coming back in. And then one more time, let's move that leg back. And then we'll hold it in that position. And as you have it back, could you here also lengthen it out? And then notice if in order to move your leg back, and this is a very likely scenario, you had to put your head, your shoulders, and your ribs forward, and see if you can move them back, and then actually see here again, could you lift your ribs from the floor? Oh, that made my leg come forward. And then still move that leg back. All right, let's bring that forward, in and down, and let's just do those few things on the other side so you can either just roll over or flip to the other side so you stay facing in the same direction. Again, what amount of padding will make this a useful setup for you? And as you come on down, be a little specific here. So you're moving your hip back towards the edge of the mat, your legs back towards the edge of the mat. And then again, if you opt here to have the elbow bent and hold your head, then see about this elbow swinging back. All right, and as you first come into this again, just take a few breaths. And again, that mapping is for a little specificity. It's to kind of circumvent the habits that are so likely to take over. And I know when I teach and when I practice, I often have my head kind of like patrol and I'll look over and look around. But once I've seen what I needed to, I'll then move my head back. So instead of plunging my head forward, I'll move it back. And with that head on my, with my hand on my head, that'll make that a little bit easier. All right, so you're gonna take that top leg up. And then, oh, we're gonna start actually with the rib cage. Sorry, I skipped a step. You're gonna have your right hand into the floor. And then I want you to think here about pressing down into that right hand. Can you lift your left ribs off the ground? And then releasing down. And we'll do a few. So I give this sort of pushing, pumping action through my right hand. I also am pressing down through my left elbow, and I'll lift and lower, lift and lower. And then after you do a couple there, let's see how this side feels. Ooh, tricky business. You can take your hand off of the floor and raise, ooh, and lower, and raise, and lower. Maybe one just to check on it. Ooh, coming up with the ribs, and then lowering back down. Not a moment too soon. Okay, then we'll get onto that leg. So as you're here, you're going to lift that top right leg off the bottom left one, and just a couple inches of clearance I think will suffice. I'm gonna move this hand out of the way so you can see what happens along my body. You can place your hand where it works for you, but this top leg is up. Now it's going to lengthen out. And I wanna get a sense here, and then I drop back down, that it's not just taking my leg up and down, that's one action. It's up and it's out, and it pulls along the entirety of my spine, and then everything just comes back down. All right, so we'll do a few there. Lifting, pushing out, and again, it's not like a tiptoe action, but really push through your heel, leg comes down, take a pause, take a rest, and then up and out. What is that pull along the body? And then back down, and then up and out, and push, and try to like lift your ribs off the floor through your leg, not even through your hand, but through that leg. And then we'll come down, and then we'll add the pump of the hands to really amplify. So up with the leg, out with the leg, and then hand presses and lift your ribs off the floor. And then ribs down, leg down, and just like a little deflation moment. And then we'll try a couple more of those. So leg off, leg stretches out like your yoga helper scurried into your room, took their hands around your ankle and gave you a tug. And then after that, with your right hand pressing, can you use that to lift your left rib cage off the floor by some amount? And then ribs down, leg down. One more. Up longer. And then hand presses and raising. And maybe try that hand free for a moment. All right, ribs down, leg down, everything on down. All right, let's take a pause from side lying for a moment. So roll to a prone position that's facing to the floor. You can stack your hands and rest your head. And find here a couple passes of breath coming and going. All right, and we're one more time going to come onto the right side. And once more, I suggest using the edge of your mat as a little bit of a grid to get an understanding of where you place yourself. So it's a balance pose. And if you're not particularly supple on the sides of your spine, you'll probably find your way to flexion, which means your legs might come forward, your knees might bend, and you might even hunch and round your upper body forward. And I know the camera angle here doesn't get this exactly, but if you could imagine the bird's eye view, I'm essentially kind of like curling into a fetal position. So while you're here, that edge of the mat is just to kind of say, like, could you line up some joints and see how that comes for you? All right, so again, I'm gonna opt for supporting the back of my head with my hand because there's some interesting neck stuff in here. If this becomes wearisome, you can lower yourself on down and you might add an additional pillow other than just your arm. But from here, we're going to take that again, that left leg up, and we're going to work on that lengthening action. So you just want to get a sense here that your top left leg is no shorter, so to speak. It's not acting any shorter than the bottom right one. In fact, you want it to go out just a little bit longer. That's going to require some length on the sides and the spine. And then from here, moving your leg back. Oh, we didn't do that on that second side. I just remembered that. Apologies for that. You're going to move that leg back and then see if you can bring your leg down. So my feet are like pretty much like toe to heel. I don't have that top foot very far back. And I want to show you an additional consideration. You might not comfortably be able to get that foot to the floor, in which case I'm lining up a bolster behind me. And that way I can experiment with a couple of different distances back. And I'm actually going to keep that for this pose. So go for that unless you can just very easily get your foot to the floor. That doesn't happen for everybody's mobility, nor even just their shape. All right, so as you're here, now that you've gotten your leg back, and we're gonna do this in a few different segments, so don't like go as far back as possible from the start. We're gonna creep into this for a little bit. But what I want you to get a sense of here is that hip extension, the thigh moving back, is very likely to have you push your ribs forward because you, me, and everyone we know, we don't actually have that much hip extension. And you can blame that on a lifestyle based on sitting and the muscles that contribute to sitting get very adapted in a shorter position. And so when we ask those things to lengthen, it's like, well, I'll do that a little bit, but then I'm going to ask everybody else around me to contribute to a movement. So as the left leg has gone back, I want you to drop your ribs down. And you want to feel like from like lowest rib to top of the pelvis, that there's a distinction of creating a little bit of muscular tone. It's not holding your breath. It's not just sucking your navel to the spine. Those things I think are irrelevant to human movements. It's actually contributing like create motions on bones, right? Create joint movements, and that's what will contract a muscle. All right, let's go to the next position of hip extension. So I'm going to lift off my bolster and just plunk it back by a couple more inches. It's really not that far. And again, you could work this on the floor, but I would imagine with your leg coming to the floor that you'll go even less back, and that's not problematic. I'm just kind of naming what's a likely outcome. And again, if you're like me, you might throw your head into the pose over and over to see what's happening. But once you've done that, move your head back. All right, and then is there one more bit of movement? So I'm placing my hands around my rib cage to make sure that I don't bow my spine forward, I don't back bend, as I might move that leg just a little bit further back. Okay, last couple of breaths right here. So working some hip extension exercise from a side lying position. It's a nice way to do it. You can kind of access that top hip pretty well. I'll have you notice here, since we're on our sort of furthest back position, that you didn't roll back and face your pelvis more to the ceiling than across your space. So if this top hip has rolled back and the bottom one is rolled forward, flip the script a little bit. All right, so while we're in this furthest back position, I'm gonna have this create one more action before we try this out on side two. What I'd like you to do, whether your foot is on a bolster, a block, a blanket, the floor, however you've made that work, I want you to push that leg down like you are scissoring it deeper into the floor, like you're really cutting into that object with the instep of your foot, which you might feel like, wow, I can barely exert power in this position, but you're going to go for it anyway. So you're going to be using that inner thigh. You're going to be using some core stability. You might try sticking your left thumb in your left waist and kind of see what the outcome is, right? So around some of that core stuff, but really pushing down on that leg that's behind you. Oh, it really feels like there's not much to bite into, but it's trying. Right? And then you can subtract that, float that leg off of its position, swing it forward, let it come on down before you rest totally, lengthen that leg out as it comes down. And let's do our second side. And as we come over into side lying on the left, getting used to the setup here, I'm suggesting that you line yourself up on the back edge of your mat. And either holding your head in your hand or coming down to side lie with the neck on some sort of support, whether it's the arm or other things. So I neglected to teach something on the first round of lying on the left. So we're just going to kind of gloss over it for a second. We're not going to get too far into it, but you can just move your leg back and forth a few times. You might even just slide it on whatever object you're using, because we kind of skipped that on the first go. And just notice here, if you end up pushing your ribs forward in order to move your leg back, and then we'll get into this very specific exercise, but just kind of going through the motion that we didn't get to yet. Oh, I can't believe I neglected to do that because it's one of my favorite things for my right psoas. Okay, then we'll go back to stacking the feet. Once more, you're going to get a sense here that you lift your leg up and you lengthen it out, just a little bit of clearance, right? Because we're not going for a high lift, just enough to get some space and push out through the heel bone. Then again, we'll do it in 3 segments. You can use a prop under your foot or not. I'm going to suggest that you do, but you might have a wildly different proportion than I have, and you might feel like the bolster, the support is of no help to you at all, but have it available if you want to try it on for size. So I've gone very not far back at all, like my feet are nearby to each other. And knowing that this is the first segment of this, so I'll proceed in kind of slowly. And you'll want to get a sense here that in order to move the leg back just those couple of inches, that you didn't have to lean forward, tip forward, right? So if I had a camera crew in here and they saw me from above, I wouldn't want to see that in order for my leg to go back, that I had to bring my upper body forward, because sum total, you are not doing any hip extension, right? So in order for your leg to go back and create that hip extension, your torso has to stay stable. And you can be very moderate when you work this. It doesn't have to be an extreme range of motion. In fact, in all honesty, the further you go back with your leg, the likelihood of you not holding your ribs in, the likelihood of you just turning your pelvis back is like, it's so very, it's so likely. It's so high, that likelihood. It's just sort of like only go on inches. There's that wall behind me, but I'm not even getting close to it. Let's do the second segment. So I'm going to lift that foot up, boink, and then just move it back a little bit. And again, as I work with that, I don't want to find that in order to move my leg back, my ribs, head, shoulders have to go forward, because that means I'm not doing hip extension. Right? If you think of like either called like a teeter-totter or a seesaw, that if one side goes down, the other side goes up, it's still a straight line. We're trying to create an angle in that, right? Because we're not simple lever systems like a teeter-totter. When this leg goes back and it has to pull your upper body forward, that means that the tension is so great that you actually are not creating a movement, a bend at the joint, and that's what we're looking for. All right, let's go to that third point, and I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to get my leg back at all. Just a little squirm, I'll try that. It's kind of my end range right here. And while you have this, do you feel like you're just kind of like slumping down, heavying the rib cage on the floor? Is that leg's behind you? Could it still lengthen out? So I'm trying to imagine there's that potted plant. Could I kick my heel bone towards that plant. So behind me and away. And then moving your ribs back, ribs back, ribs back. And then on this furthest point, I think you'll have to monitor for yourself. Yeah, no surprise, a little bit of that was happening. Are you rolling the pelvis back? And could you roll it forward so that your pelvis is, I guess the term that people use is stacked. Oh, a couple more breaths here. And then this last part, at this furthest back range of motion, we're going to add not just like throw the leg back and feel it stretch. So that is partly what we're doing. From there, I want you to push down. So I'm trying to put my instep, my inner ankle, that inside of my foot firmly into my bolster. The bolster is so squishy, but I don't really feel like I'm squishing it at all. It's like just I'm in a place where it's hard to exert force. And that's how we do strength building. That's how we do it. And pushing down and pushing down and pushing down, down, down. And how does that impact your core, your back, your hip strength, the stuff around your pelvis? All right, last couple of breaths. Oh, pressing down maximally and then releasing that. Foot comes up. Can it even come up? Oh, comes forward, comes back down. And then let's take our pause in a prone position. So you can stack your hands to rest your forehead. All right, and we're gonna come back, guess what, to side lying. No surprise there. So when you come onto your right side, this time instead of being really stretched low with the upper body, you're gonna prop yourself up onto your elbow. So like so, right? So instead of being flattened down, you're in more of a curve. And as you have this, we're gonna keep that sense here of the top leg kind of sliding out, right? Which is, it's going to be facilitated here by the fact that you curved your upper body from the floor. So that should feel like a little bit more like, yeah, that's a foregone conclusion. The top leg is longer than the bottom one. All right, and as you have this, you're going to press into that elbow, reach here, your top hand up, and really press down into that elbow and forearm. So if you find yourself shrugging and leading down towards the floor with your rib cage, give that a good pump and lift yourself up. And then even think here about lifting your ribs from the floor. And then take that top arm back, like I'm imagining my fingernails would tap onto the wall behind me. It won't happen, but that's the direction. And then from here, I'm going to sweep across. I'm going to think about bringing my left elbow to the floor. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second because this is one where people get a little befuddled. So as I have this, I have both forearms on the floor. The right one never moved, but I'm putting here my left elbow to the floor. Now I'm going to pause for a moment and I'm going to unwind myself just to gesture. When you do this, you are not turning your navel and your hip to the floor. We're looking to come into a twist. So as you work with this, keep moving this top hip back as you bring, this left elbow down, right? So this would be easier, right? Like I'm almost on a prone position, I'm almost belly down. You can see my feet are almost pointing back behind me. But instead, I wanna be side lying. And we'll give it a few breaths. And if you can get this left elbow down, your next task is to slide it along as though the elbows would be in line with each other. You could think about that arm position, that shoulder position known as Garudasana. It's a little bit of that in here. Right, and then push down that right elbow, unwind, come all the way up, and let's go back in. Once you're there, can you push both elbows down? I bet the right one is doing a lot of nudging the floor, but could you think here about pushing the left elbow down? All right, and then we'll come all the way up, out, reaching back, and then one more time in. I'm kind of like looking through my legs. I see my feet coming forward. No surprise there. This is a tough one. So flexion at the hips begins to sneak in. So if your legs have come forward, can you slide them back? All right, and then we'll come all the way up and out, and then we'll do that on side two. So to side lying we go. And instead of like slinking all the way down to the ground, onto that elbow. And when you're on your elbow, you're gonna think here about not just like shrugging down, getting that like ear to shoulder movement, but this shoulder blade will go way down your back. And you'll even think here about lifting your ribs up a little bit so you're not just steeply bending in the left waist, right waist. Top leg reaches out. And again, in this position, you should find that that's a little bit more accessible. And then top arm takes its big, tall length, and we'll just kind of go up for a moment, up and up and up and up. We'll tip back, like I'm gonna tap my fingernails on the windowsill behind me. And then from here, taking this arm down, think thread the needle, right? We've done that twist many, many times over. Ooh. And as you come on down, the first one can kind of be like, how's it going? But once you get in there, I'm gonna kind of peek through my arms. Yeah, hips are not so bad on this one. You wanna make sure that you're not letting that top hip roll forward. And can you press down, not just to the left arm, which is going to be happening for certain, but if you can get your right elbow to the ground, can it actually press the floor? And if it can't, like if you're just on like the heel of your hand, I want you to think about just bending that elbow deeper. So you're gonna come up with any scheme you can to close the distance between that elbow and the floor. That's just gonna make you twist more. All right, let's unwind, reach up, reach way back, make sure that you're keeping up with really great scapular stability on that left arm, and then we'll come under, around, and through, and can you get the elbow close? And if it does touch the floor, you're moving it over. If it's not on the floor, you are working to press it down. Top right hip tips back, not forward. And then we'll come all the way up and out. Top arm reaches, top arm tilts back, open the chest for the moment. And then under, around, and through. And pushing the elbow and twisting the chest. And twisting the chest and pushing the elbow. Give it 1 or 2 more breaths here. Class is at 9. Sorry. I'll catch up with you in a second. I'm just closing up one little class here online for a moment. No, don't worry about it. And then we'll come all the way on up, out, and turn open. And then from here, we're gonna come all the way down, face the ground, take a couple of breaths. And that's your side lying short and sweet class. And we'll catch up again sometime soon.